Alright, so I want to talk to you about something that happened out in Berea today, because it's the kind of day that's going to get spun 1,000 different ways online by tonight, and I'd rather you hear it straight from me first, before the noise takes over. This was day 2 of Cleveland Browns training camp, and if you blinked, you might have missed just how loud this practice actually got. Not loud in the sense of music or hype videos. Loud in the sense of pads, of bodies hitting the turf, of a defense that showed up looking like it had something to prove against its own quarterbacks. I watched every rep I could get my hands on, multiple angles, slowed down, rewound, and I want to walk you through it honestly. Not through a filter, not through a narrative somebody built before the ball was even snapped. Just what I saw. Let's start with the headline, because there's no point burying it. The Cleveland defense flat out mauled the offense today. I mean that in the most literal sense possible. Denzel Ward and Grant Delpit were living in that backfield like they owned the deed to it. And when a defense like that gets its hands on a rookie quarterback trying to find his footing in a new system, things get messy fast. That's exactly what happened to Shedeur Sanders. Now before you start typing out your hot take, let me actually break down what messy looked like, because it wasn't disaster. It was something more complicated than that, and complicated is usually where the real story lives. Shedeur finished the day completing somewhere around 58% of his throws. On paper, in a vacuum, that number doesn't jump off the screen at you. But strip away the box score for a second and look at the tape, because the tape tells a different story than the stat sheet does. This wasn't a case of a young quarterback getting rattled and falling apart. This was a case of a young quarterback walking into a buzzsaw, eating some free hits from a defense unloading everything it had, and still finding ways to make winning throws in between the chaos. There's a difference between a bad day and a hard day, and today was hard, not bad. Before we even get into the throws, we've got to talk about the ugly stuff, because I'm not here to sugarcoat anything for you. There were false starts, multiple ones. Harold Fannin got flagged for a pre-snap issue of his own, and when your tight end is jumping early, that tells you the operation up front still has some rust to shake off. That's not a Shedeur problem specifically, that's a full unit problem, and in the biggest team period of the day, the first team offense ran into serious trouble. One report from someone on the ground called it disastrous for that opening set of 11-on-11 reps, with a near sack, well, technically credited as a sack, forced by Ronnie Hickman right in the middle of that stretch. So picture that. Your starting group, your presumed guy, gets thrown right into the fire in the very first sequence, and the fire wins the first round. But here's what I need you to hold on to, because this is the part people are going to skip over when they clip the lowlights tonight. Shedeur didn't fold. He didn't get gun-shy. He didn't start flinching in the pocket the way young quarterbacks sometimes do when the walls start closing in early. Instead, as the reps went on, something shifted. He found a rhythm late in that period, closing it out with a really nice completion to Isaiah Bond on a dig route that showed anticipation, showed touch, showed a quarterback trusting his eyes even after getting hunted for the better part of 10 minutes. Now let's actually get into the throws themselves, because this is where the tape does the talking better than any stat line ever could. Early in the session, I saw a connection to Denzel Boston that I want you to really sit with for a second. Because the way this ball traveled, the placement, the anticipation before the receiver even broke, that's not luck. That's rhythm between a quarterback and a target that's starting to develop real chemistry. I went back and watched it from a second angle just to make sure I wasn't overreacting, and no, that ball was placed exactly where it needed to be, giving his guy a chance to do damage after the catch. Then you start seeing the checkdowns, the quick game to Tylan Wallace, a nice underneath route that got him moving and picked up positive yardage in a phase of the game where a lot of young passers panic and just chuck it downfield out of frustration. Shedeur didn't do that today. Even while getting his doors blown off up front, he kept working through his progressions, kept finding the underneath option when the top of the route tree wasn't there, and that patience, that discipline under duress, is honestly one of the more encouraging things I took away from the entire practice. And then there's the one throw. The one I keep coming back to, the one I'd call the single best moment of his entire day. I'm talking about the ball he dropped in over the top to Harold Landry, sitting right in the middle of the field. Multiple defenders around him, a window that most quarterbacks would have talked themselves out of even attempting, and Shedeur just let it fly with total conviction. It wasn't reckless, it was decisive. There's a version of this throw where a young quarterback hesitates, holds it half a second too long, and it turns into an interception highlight on somebody else's channel tonight. Instead, it turned into a full go, full send, trust your read and rip it moment, and it landed exactly where it was supposed to. I also want to bring up the throw to the tight end, the one that Jared Verse was actually in coverage on. Watching Shedeur navigate that window, throwing it low enough and away from the defender's outstretched hand, that's veteran-level ball placement from a guy who is still getting his first real extended look inside this offense. It wasn't the prettiest throw of the day if you're grading purely on aesthetics, but if you're grading on football IQ, on understanding exactly where a defender's leverage is and threading around it, that ball deserves way more attention than it's probably going to get. Now here's where things get spicy, and I promise you this is going to be a conversation topic all night long across every corner of Brown's social media. There was a throw to Isaiah Bond that a good chunk of the media watching live called a touchdown in real time. I watched it back multiple times and look, I lean toward agreeing there's a real case that it crossed the plane before he stepped out. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and pretend I'm 100% certain because I'm not the one making that call for a living. But what I will say is this. That same media contingent didn't call a similar situation a touchdown the day before either, a play involving Casey Concepcion that barely had a defender's hand on him. So there's a pattern here worth noticing. Whether that pattern means something or it's just camp being camp with inconsistent whistle standards, I'll let you be the judge. But it's the kind of small detail that, when you add it up across 2 straight days, starts to look less like coincidence. Alright, let's shift over to Deshaun Watson, because his day deserves its own spotlight, and there's real context here that matters. Remember, this comes right on the heels of a 2-interception outing, and today, he looked like a guy determined to put that behind him. Working mostly against the second team, sure, that context matters and I won't pretend it doesn't, but sharper is sharper regardless of who's lined up across from you. The one throw that stuck with me the most was him rolling out to his right and firing back across his body to his left, finding Casey Concepcion in stride. That's not a schoolyard throw. That's the exact kind of play that shows off arm talent and mechanics that not many quarterbacks in this league can actually produce consistently. If you're a Browns fan looking for the argument for why Deshaun Watson still has real value on that roster, that's the throw you point to. That's the value proposition on tape, right there in real time. He also connected with Malachi Corley on a nicely timed out route, the kind of rhythm throw that comes from repetition and trust, and he found his tight end on a heavier-bodied catch through traffic that showed he's still got the arm strength to fit balls into windows that close quickly. Was it a perfect day? No, he did miss on a warm-up throw earlier that I want to be honest about too, because balance in reporting matters to me. But taken as a whole, this was a bounce-back performance, and bounce-back performances matter just as much as flashy ones, maybe more because they tell you something about mental toughness after a bad outing. Now, let's talk about the guy who might be quietly having the best camp story of anybody on that roster, and that's Dylan Gabriel. 6 for 6 today. Not flashy headline numbers necessarily, but efficiency, especially in limited reps behind 2 other quarterbacks getting the bulk of the attention, tells its own story, and it's not a one-day thing either. Multiple people around the building have noted he's been stacking quality practices going all the way back through OTAs and minicamp. There's a throw of his today that I'm calling an absolute masterpiece, a play where the placement was so precise, so effortlessly delivered, that it almost got lost in the shuffle of everything else going on around it because it wasn't attached to a marquee name getting the spotlight. Don't sleep on that. In a quarterback room, this crowded consistency and limited opportunity is exactly how a guy climbs a depth chart quietly while everybody's watching somebody else. Now, we have to address the moment that stopped conversation cold at that practice facility, because you can't talk about day 2 without talking about who showed up on the sideline. Deion Sanders was there. in the flesh, watching his son work, staying after practice just like he did the day before, just like he's done plenty of times throughout the past year. And when reporters tried to pull him aside for an interview, he made it clear, politely but firmly, that he wasn't there to talk to cameras. He was there to watch football. He was there to watch his son. That's it. Simple as that. And here's my honest reaction to that whole storyline, because I know it's going to blow up regardless of what I say. There were people in the Browns media ecosystem who seemed almost offended that a Hall of Fame player and Hall of Fame father would dare show up to watch his own kid compete for a starting job in the NFL. I don't get that reaction, honestly. I don't get why a father showing support becomes a distraction narrative instead of just being what it plainly is, which is a father showing support. This isn't new behavior from him. He did this last season consistently. He did it yesterday too. And he did it again today, staying late to watch extra work with Tylan Wallace, Tylan Green, and Denzel Boston out there getting after it once the main session wrapped. If that's controversial to you, I think the controversy says more about the noise machine than it does about Deion Sanders. Let's zoom out for a second and put some real numbers next to the names, because the stat comparison between the two starting caliber quarterbacks tells an interesting story on its own. Deshaun threw 2 fewer passes overall and completed 2 more than Shedeur did. That's the actual gap in production today. Not some enormous chasm, just a handful of plays separating 2 very different narratives being built around them. But here's the number that actually matters most to me when I'm evaluating a young quarterback in year 1 of real reps. 0 interceptions from Shedeur. 0. Against a defense that was teeing off all day, against pressure that was showing up both before and after the snap, against a unit clearly sent out there with instructions to make things uncomfortable, he didn't turn the ball over once. That's the number I'm hanging on to tonight, not the completion percentage. I want to bring in some of what the reporters actually on site were saying too, because their real-time notes lined up with almost everything I picked up on tape. One writer described it as a rough start for the top offensive unit before Shedeur eventually settled into a rhythm late, closing strong with that Isaiah Bond completion. Another beat reporter framed Deshaun's day as a clear step forward after his rough 2-pick outing, while also being upfront that the offensive line is still very much a work in progress, still adjusting to pressure looks, still eating penalties they'll need to clean up before the games start counting. And that context is important because you can't fully separate a quarterback's performance from the protection, or lack of protection, happening in front of him. Let's not forget the backs either, because I think people are going to completely overlook this in the next 24 hours while they argue about quarterbacks. Dylan Sampson looked explosive out there today, and I want to be clear, this isn't a new revelation to me. I've been saying since before this training camp even started that this is a player who's going to get lost in the shuffle of bigger name conversations, but every single time he gets real touches, explosive things happen. And Quinshon Jackson, don't you dare forget about him either. Rookie season production, while the offensive line in front of him was falling apart around him, tells you what kind of talent is sitting in that backfield. If that offensive line actually holds up the way everybody's hoping it will this year, both of these backs have a real chance to make a lot of noise. So, where does that leave us after 2 days of camp? Here's my honest read. This isn't a story about one guy clearly winning a job and another guy clearly losing it. This is a story about a competitive room where every single rep matters, where a defense is playing with an edge that's going to make every single quarterback in that building earn everything they get. Shedeur had a day that on the surface looks rough, but underneath it showed real signs of the aggression, anticipation, and command at the line of scrimmage that got people excited about him in the first place. Deshaun answered adversity from 2 days prior with the kind of sharp, veteran-level throw that reminds everybody exactly why he still has believers in that building. And Dylan Gabriel just keeps quietly doing his job, efficient, professional, patient, waiting for his window. Add in the fact that Harold Landry is fully healthy and still delivering the same impact I told you about a year ago. Add in Dylan Sampson finally getting the touches I've been begging for since before camp opened. Add in Quinshon Jackson still lurking as a real weapon, and add in a receiving core that genuinely looks improved from a season ago. and you start to understand why I'm allowing myself some real optimism here, even after a day where the defense embarrassed the offense for long stretches. Rough practices happen. Getting mauled up front happens, especially before pads go on and linemen can actually simulate real game speed protection. What matters is how the guys with the ball in their hands respond when things get chaotic, and today, at least 2 of the 3 quarterbacks in that building responded exactly the way you want them to. There's a lot more football coming out of Berea before this camp wraps, and I'll be right here breaking down every single rep of it for you, the same way I did today, honestly, without an agenda, without picking a side before the tape even loads. Let me know down in the comments how you graded today. Good day for Shedeur? Bad day for Shedeur? Did Deshaun do enough to remind everybody what he's capable of? Is Dylan Gabriel quietly building a case nobody's paying attention to yet? I want to hear all of it. We've got so much more football content on the way, so stay locked in because this quarterback competition is just getting started, and days like today are exactly why it's going to be must-watch television all the way through the preseason.